Hey folks, thanks for watching on this Thursday, May 22nd. We kind of went into 2025. I made the case that at least this year, this growing season, we had comparatively more drought risk than maybe we have in a given year. And we've talked about some of the reasons for that. One, coming out of a La Nina, we had fall drought in 24. Going through the 24 to 25 winter, we saw a lack of snowpack, maybe in kind of the northern tier of the U.S., Chicago, toward Des Moines, over toward Sioux Falls, some areas west of there as well. And kind of correlating those things with past years, notice that at least as analogs started popping up, there were more kind of in that drought bucket than we usually have going into the year. Now, we kind of measured that conversation, both Eric and I, with this understanding that there is this spring unpredictability window. We have to see where the rains are going to fall, which areas are going to dry out at what time going through April and then May, and kind of look at current observations and trends and try to piece together that forecast right in those critical months of June and July. And that process doesn't stop here in mid-May. And toward that exercise, I wanted to take a look at maybe something of a different metric, which I think informs us as to where we might be going in terms of that drier or drought conversation into the future. And this is actually this is a product from NASA and USDA. It's called the GIMS, Global Agricultural Monitoring. I call it the GLAM for short. You can find the URL up here. I'll hope to put it in the description. Maybe you can go to it. It's fun to play around with. And what we're really looking at here is NDVI. And we're comparing that to past years. So really kind of looking at ground cover vegetation, trying to get an idea of where there's moisture, right, and some of the ground cover and the plants here and the crops, and then what kind of moisture demand or evaporative demand might be there later in the year, and how that can inform us as to where we might be going. And I'm picking on, you see here, kind of the southern U.S. right now, and I'm doing that for a reason, because we can think of this for some of those same areas where we had drought risk going into 25, right? Those low snowpack areas, a wide area here with that fall drought last year, right? We've seen the Climate Prediction Center forecast come in drier, kind of in a swath here, maybe stretching into the southern plains. In the southern U.S., we can sort of think of as a source region for that area, in the sense that a lot of these rainfall events or thunderstorm events that are going to come through in June and July are going to source moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. Here's Bermuda, kind of over on the side here, and it's going to pull that Gulf moisture, if we have that proper Bermuda high, which we're always so focused on, in this area, and try to advect that into some of these areas here where maybe we're concerned about drought this year. And if this area goes dry, as it has in years past, it can steal some of those rainfall events, right? There's more water demand coming from stressed crops here, and we struggle to advect moisture all the way up into some of these other states here. And in fact, just kind of pulling up some of these so-called problem years from the past, I picked on 2012, 2011, 06, 02, 06 specifically had some drought more in the northern tier of that area that we were just talking about. And if we look at the NDVI from all those years, spring going into summer, 2025 is in red. And at least at this point in mid-May, there is a slight lag on this data here of a week or so. All of those problem years, we had more dryness or less NDVI, at least in the ground cover here in the south, than we do going into this year. Now, we've dried out a little bit recently. A lot of this is over here in Texas. Some of this, kind of critically, is actually here in the Delta, where they're not dry, so to speak, but it's been harder to get a crop in the ground because of just how much moisture that they've had in some of these areas here. So they're running a bit behind in that regard. And what's kind of nice about this product is it's not looking just at rainfall, which is helpful certainly, but a lot of the excess rainfall that we had across the Mid-South made its way into the Ohio River Valley. We saw those pictures. It made its way into the Tennessee Valley. It's flown out to the Gulf of Mexico, where it can't really help us at this point. It needs to get into either the hydrology or some of the ground cover to then help reproduce moisture and kind of recycle that back into the air as some of these air masses move north. So I think this is kind of a feather in the cap toward a more productive area in some of the regions to the north. Now, like I said, we have seen that recent dryness here recently. We'll have to keep an eye on that, because if we look at those problem years between mid-May and mid-June, almost all of them trended down. Right, so the evaporative demand, the water demand, increased in this area over the next 30 days in those problem years. So this is a map that we'll return to, and in fact, I might return to it when we look at some specific states here later in this video that we're going to be watching here closely going forward, just in terms of how that drought conversation might evolve, not only in these areas, right, but in areas further toward the north. Kind of pulled up a quick snapshot. This is surface level winds. I pulled this just an example in mid-June last year. So I was trying to find a date kind of right in the middle of that downtrend. And just mid-June last year, 2024, which is a wet year, you can see that Bermuda high spinning, pumping that moisture right up through this area. So when we're wet here, we're able to get that moisture all the way up. And in fact, maybe 2024 in June, we got too much of it, all at once up in Sioux Falls. But it shows that trajectory of those moisture and rainfall events as they get into the thunderstorms in the central part of the country. I was kind of jumping around at June and summer dates last year trying to find that image there. I did pull up this one almost on accident. And this was actually Hurricane Beryl, which was much stronger at one point, but did make landfall in southeast Texas. I believe it was a Category 1 hurricane. It kind of reminds us here, this was July 8th, so we saw this spin up actually in June. That we're actually not that far away from the hurricane season here. In fact, in the eastern Pacific, it begins in mid-May, so we actually started our hurricane season about a week ago in the eastern Pacific. The Atlantic, it starts on June 1st, and while we don't expect a ton of hurricanes in June, they can happen. Beryl is an example of one that came through in early July and frankly produced quite a bit of tornadoes and a lot of rainfall, in some cases important rainfall in areas of the central Corn Belt, Indiana, and Illinois and Michigan. I bring this up because if we look over at the eastern Pacific, we have an area of concern out from the National Hurricane Center. I was surprised to see this, but again, May 15th has passed. We are in the eastern Pacific hurricane season here, and we have one to watch. Now, these hurricanes here in the eastern Pacific typically, unfortunately, don't impact land too often. They can sometimes recurve up into Mexico and cause major issues there, or kind of sneak back up into the southwest. They typically weaken, but can bring monsoon-like rainfalls to portions of the southeast. But maybe more critically, I watch these because these can actually impact the jet stream in some interesting ways. You can think of hurricanes, and maybe I have a diagram pulled up here as, say, kind of a heat engine where they're taking that warm, moist air from the ocean, or evaporating that into the air, pulling that up into the thunderstorm. They convert it into thunderstorms, water, latent heat, and that heat is converted up into the upper atmosphere where it has to go somewhere. The Earth and nature, it doesn't like imbalances. So when it sees this excess heat in the upper levels of the atmosphere, it's going to attempt to redistribute that around. And so you can think of a hurricane, in this area of the country. When it's producing all that heat in this area, it's going to try to redistribute that either to the north or to the east, sometimes to the west. We call that its outflow. And that can impact our jet stream, right? It can strengthen the subtropical jet stream. It can help nudge that over Texas or help bring storms up into Oklahoma, maybe all the way up into the central part of the country. So the way these develop, even if they don't impact land directly, by that I mean the storm surge or the direct strong winds just around the center of the circulation, they can affect our weather. They can determine who gets rain in a week and who doesn't. And we'll look at that in the forecast in a bit here. The area of focus, it's pretty small right now, so the expectation is a 50% chance of development over the next 7 days. It's going to take a while for this area or this disturbance of these thunderstorms here, tropical in nature, south of Mexico. You can see those spinning. So that's the area the National Hurricane Center has identified, potentially bubbling up, kind of moving toward the northwest and developing. And we'll have to keep an eye on that to see how that might impact the subtropical jet stream going forward. The GFS, if we jump over and look at that forecast quickly now, we'll kind of ignore all the details of the Century S, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I'm going to take this forecast out to Tuesday of next week, Wednesday. You'll notice I'm going pretty quickly here because we have to get all the way out to Friday of next week before that hurricane even shows up. And the GFS has been a bit stronger with this system. And if we kind of take this forecast back, it's off screen, but it is developing quickly here south of Mexico. And it's helping to juice the jet stream a little bit. That is the subtropical jet stream mid next week. As that comes in and weakens here just off the coast of Mexico, could help bring some storms through the central part of the country, at least in terms of this GFS forecast. The ECMWF, if I take it to that same time, Wednesday of next week, it has been comparably weaker with that storm. It's not kind of popping up here, not making its way more toward the north. It's actually staying more toward the west, and that jet stream is staying really kind of in the southern part of the country. So the GFS gets more of that activity up maybe into the central plains, maybe even some of the debris getting into portions of the central Mississippi Valley, whereas the ECMWF and the AAFS keep that jet stream more toward the south and keep more of this rain down here. So even this 50% chance of development is starting to cause forks in the forecast, which is why we follow these so closely. All right, now kind of catching us up to current weather across the continental U.S. We just look at the jet stream here, valid as this morning. It's May 22nd, about 6 a.m. Central Time. See this trough here over the eastern U.S. kind of spinning right over Lake Huron here, and this has brought cold temperatures down into the northern tier of the country. That's going to continue, unfortunately, over the next few days. We'll take a look at that in a second. We do see kind of another very weak trough here, just kind of over the western U.S. coming toward Eureka, California. We'll talk about that in a second, how that might play into the precipitation conversation in the Central Plains. If we look at the NOAA All Hazards map, valid as of this morning, let's update this maybe kind of mid. There we go, 6:30 Central Time. That cold weather that's settled in across the northern part of the country, frost advisories in northern Minnesota. Dakota's looking at frost advisories, and then a freeze warning here over portions of southwest North Dakota. We actually didn't see these cold temperatures materialize as significantly this morning. In fact, if we jump over and look at those current temperatures, update those at about 6:30 a.m. We do have some observations getting close to that freezing line here, some over here in northeastern portions of Minnesota. But we actually had quite a bit of fog develop in this area overnight, right? Temperatures dropping quickly, that can happen. And so we can see these different fog advisories, these 2 lines here, indicative of that kind of thick fog here. The 3 lines there, you can see quarter-mile visibility in southern North Dakota. And that fog is going to trap some of that warm air near the surface. And so it's not a coincidence that these fog observations are at 41, 39, 41, 37, 36. And then the ones outside of fog over in southwestern South Dakota down to 34. No fog here, kind of on the state line down to 34. And then this one here all the way down to 30, despite reporting some fog. So some of these getting close to that freezing line, but a lot of these stations outside of it staying up above 35 degrees this morning. If we jump over and look at the radar mosaic valid as of this morning, you can see, again, that trough's kind of centered here over Lake Huron. It does have a surface reflection, so that surface low somewhere here over the eastern Great Lakes. You can see all the precipitation spinning around that. So showers continuing here this morning after what was a pretty wet day across Pennsylvania, eastern Ohio yesterday. Even saw some thunderstorms move through here. We believe we had a tornado report or 2, I think one near Butler, PA, as well, maybe one here in near Ohio. They weren't strong, but enough to get some severe reports on the map. Seeing additional precipitation spreading here today. Also saw a few thunderstorms move through portions of southern Missouri and northeastern Arkansas yesterday evening. So kind of see the remnants of those showers here this morning. But otherwise, kind of a quiet map here versus what we were dealing with just a few days ago, even some of the thunderstorms showing up in the morning in the past week. We'll jump over and look at the 3-kilometer NAM. I'm going to take that simulated radar forecast, and we'll take it through the forecast through the next few days here to see where that trough's going to go and what kind of storms might form behind it toward the Central Plains. If I take that through this morning, I'm going to take this to lunchtime, 1 p.m. Central, and we can see some thunderstorm development expected between Oklahoma City and Wichita Falls. Additional development possible over toward the Panhandle portions of West Texas. This is 6 p.m. this evening. Those storms weakening quickly, maybe some percolating further south across the south central portion of Texas, and weakening overnight as we get into tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. We're seeing some of that precipitation and shower activity toward the northeast starting to exit over Maine and then east of there. And then potential renewed thunderstorm development around lunchtime in portions of central Kansas, portions of central Oklahoma. Renewed development along the Panhandle later in the evening. And then potentially additional overnight storm development going into early Saturday morning. So we get through the day on Friday and then into Saturday around lunchtime with additional thunderstorm remnants here lingering around portions of the Mid-South and the Central Plains. So daily storm chances over toward the Central Plains. If we look over at the Storm Prediction Center, slight risk. This is largely for hail here south of Oklahoma City, north of the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. But I'd include the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area and some of that hail potential here as we go through the afternoon today. Slight area risk shifts more toward Kansas over portions of western Nebraska. Going to be looking at the storm coverage closely because if we look at some of the rainfall events just this week, we zoom in on this area of the Central Plains, we'll notice that same area that's kind of circled in slight risk there missed out on a lot of the rainfall just over the last kind of 3 to 4 days, even portions of central Nebraska and north central Nebraska that we've been watching closely. In fact, just kind of while this map is up, some other areas that we've been focused on, portions of northern Illinois over toward Iowa, northern Indiana, even southern Michigan, we've been watching soil moisture deficits here. So it was nice to see some healthy rains get into this area, almost 4 inches plus. Some of these areas in central Iowa doing very well over the last few days. I've seen those reports come in, so appreciate you sending those over. There are some holes in here. Portions of northern Illinois didn't quite get up toward an inch. There's some of that extended over toward northern Indiana. There's some drier spots here in southern Illinois that didn't quite get up toward an inch as well. So we'll have to keep an eye on these going forward. A half inch isn't really going to cover the soil moisture deficits in some of these areas that we were looking at, even northeastern Iowa. So there are still holes in here, western Iowa as well. And then we talked about some of those over in the Central Plains as well. Kind of picking on Nebraska specifically, I pull up that NDVI map again for the state. You'll notice 2025, at least compared to 24 and then 02, which was a rough year down in green, that we're down more toward that 02 territory than we are toward the 24 territory here in May. Now, 02 never recovered significantly and is actually kind of that bottom benchmark in terms of the last 20-year minimum. So it's going to be important to watch how this goes forward. Some of these rains here, right, would help us inch these NDVI, the rainfall and soil moisture deficits, in the positive direction at this point. I want to go over this as we looked at today, Thursday. We shifted into Friday. We saw that slight risk develop. We saw the severe storms potentially, hail and wind risk. We'll keep an eye on where that rainfall occurs in portions of northwestern Kansas, western Nebraska. That storm activity shifting back over central Oklahoma as we go through the day Saturday, but a wider area of marginal risk extending through the mid-south. So wide section of the country could see thunderstorm development as we go through the day on Saturday. And just kind of sum that up from the 3-kilometer NAM here, the forecast. See some of those storms moving through portions of western Nebraska, getting into central Kansas, Oklahoma, portions of West Texas, and we can see that strip here through portions of Arkansas and the mid-south over toward western Tennessee, and the rainfall that we're expecting here over portions of the New England colonial area, getting out of the area over the next 48 hours or so. We jump over and look at those latest NASA soil moisture estimates. This is down through the root zone here. Like I said, had a good amount of rainfall in this area here across the central Corn Belt. We talked about the 4 inches of rain in Iowa. The soil moisture deficit is still lingering a little bit here. This is valid as of this morning. And again, the holes that we missed out on here, even just kind of lacking getting up toward 1 inch of precipitation, is worth kind of keeping an eye on as we go forward. I mentioned western Iowa, that shows up here. I mentioned central and western Nebraska. We'll have to see how that rainfall develops. So definitely improve the situation in kind of a wide swath here, but still worth watching going forward. We talked about the moisture to our south. That's good news. Not quite out of the woods yet in terms of the soil moistures here going into June. And the reason I bring that up is because if we look at the forecast going forward, I'll update this here, make this valid as of about 7 a.m. this morning. This is that trough ridge pattern from the ECMWF forecast at 500 millibars. There's that trough I talked about kind of centered over the Great Lakes. That's spinning here this morning. I'm going to take this forecast into tomorrow morning. That's Friday at 7 a.m. You can see this continuing to spin here. We saw those lingering showers over portions of New England and the mid-Atlantic. Some of the thunderstorms getting up and over this ridge here Friday, bringing those storm systems into portions of the Central Plains. So I take this into Saturday morning. We still see this dominant ridge here across Canada. Now this trough here over portions of New England is starting to exit toward the east. But even going out to Sunday afternoon, you can still see this ridge parked here across the northern tier of the country. We see kind of weak troughing underneath that on Tuesday. And really what we're seeing here is the jet stream fleeing up into Canada. There's another piece of it that's sneaking down here. It's allowing some flow to come across portions of the southern U.S., allowing some flow to come back up toward the high plains here. But really convergent flow in this area here over the middle part of the country. And what I mean by that is convergent flow means that we're likely to have more of a high pressure system here somewhere over the northern plains. It's going to suppress precipitation in this area here, portions of the central portion of the country. We'll take a look at those precipitation anomalies in just a second. As I take this forecast through next week, we still see that high lingering near the Hudson Bay and another piece of it developing quickly here over the western U.S. with potentially high temperatures now pushing into the forecast late next week. California, Nevada, Washington, up toward the Seattle-Tacoma area, with a lack of precipitation over the middle part of the country. That story remains because this ridge remains. And at times, it even allows this trough to kind of redevelop over the eastern U.S., bringing temperatures down in this area here. So this story, as it develops as we get into early June, is going to be worth watching. If we look at the precipitation conversation over that same time period, let's make this ECMWF precip forecast valid as of this morning here, about 7 a.m. And we'll run that out to this evening. See some of those thunderstorms, not a huge signal, but developing near the Wichita Falls area, north of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metro. South Oklahoma City lines up nicely with that slight risk from the Storm Prediction Center. Additional showers here lingering across portions of the New England here today, heavier over toward the Boston, Connecticut, Rhode Island corridor. Let's take the forecast into tomorrow, Friday morning. You can see some of those storms coming quickly through the central and northern plains here. Again, watching the coverage here in terms of precipitation. Through the evening, those move into areas more towards southeast Kansas, northwest Arkansas, southwest Missouri, northeast Oklahoma. As we go into Saturday afternoon, see those lingering over portions of the mid-south. We saw western Tennessee, that kind of strip of heavier precipitation through Arkansas, southern Missouri. These storms responsible for that. But even Saturday afternoon, potentially renewed storm development up here in western Nebraska, getting into central Nebraska, maybe Kansas, eastern Wyoming, western South Dakota, eastern Montana. And as we get through into Sunday morning, still lingering over this corridor here, right? That jet stream wind is kind of wrapping around like this. So it's allowing some of these storms to come through here with that jet stream level flow. Storms continuing to fire along that temperature boundary there. Again, you can see that flow here. Here's that high pressure system that we talked about preventing rainfall in this area, but it's helping to allow some of the precipitation again along the jet stream there. This is Monday. Additional showers and storms across the southern U.S. as we go through Tuesday. Similar activity here. Some of this now getting up into the mid-Atlantic here as we get into the middle part of next week. We're continuing to see showers and storms develop in the southern tier of the country. Now all the way out to the end of next week, this is Saturday, we're seeing renewed development along the Central Plains. So that's kind of the strip that we're watching here, almost this kind of view over the next kind of 7 to 10 days. And where we're lacking it is in the central part of the country. And we'll have to watch how these areas develop over the next 7 days. If we just look quickly at the ECMWF, the 10-day precipitation anomaly, you can see that wide area of below average rainfall expected. Again, under that, kind of almost that backwards S that you can see there. I'm going to call it a 2. With the jet stream level flow further toward the south and that high pressure system settling in over the central part of the country, bringing some of that colder air down through Canada. We'll take a look at the temperatures in a second into the eastern part of the country, but lacking rainfall in an area here we just talked about, right? We just mentioned some of these areas lingering with those soil moisture deficits even after the recent rains here. And if we add another 7 to 10 days of dryness on top of that, I can assure you that soil moisture map is going to light right back up. And we're going to see some of those values increase yet again. Look at the AIFS forecast. It looks very similar at this point. Pretty consistent with what we saw from the ECMWF just a second ago. But the GFS, remember, that was the one. If I pull that up here, let's see if I can find that quickly. I can't, so we'll pull that up. The GFS was the one that had that stronger system coming out of the Eastern Pacific. So I'm actually going to show. Let's get the GFS 10-day anomalies pulled up. There's 5 days, there's 7 days, and there's the 10-day anomalies. Now, while it certainly looks similar, that same area here over the Midwest, northern part of the country, the values aren't quite as strong, and that's because at the end of next week, with that stronger hurricane kind of riding up west of Mexico, it allows that subtropical jet to get further up into the middle part of the country, and it's allowing the remnants of some of these storms to bring showers and precipitation over into the central Corn Belt. So we'll be watching that hurricane closely. Even if it doesn't affect land, right, it can affect the jet stream. It may even affect the precipitation forecast for areas like Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, even Indiana as we go through the end of the next week. Now, the ECMWF AIFS, I'm going to take this forecast out to the end of next week. This is Friday. And we mention that because we're seeing this ridge start to dominate on the AIFS forecast out in the western U.S. And that's allowing, as that ridge kind of increases in strength, either over the Northeast Pacific or the western U.S., bringing the heat there, it's allowing some of these troughs to get further back toward the west, which would likely bring renewed precipitation chances into some of these areas here in the central Corn Belt as we get into early June. I'll take this forecast a little bit further out. You'll notice the jet stream now kind of coming over Iowa, parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin. It wouldn't be, gangbusters in terms of precipitation, but even this trough here, kind of sneaking into the Pacific Northwest, would allow some systems, I think, to sneak through here and rain to return to the forecast, at least more so than it does over kind of the next 7 to 10 days here. We're well out into the forecast now. This is just the AIFS solution, but it's something we're keeping an eye on going forward. Another thing I'll mention here is we take this forecast back toward Saturday, May 31st, well out into the forecast here. But that is a very strong ridge over California, so I'm seeing a slight risk for excessive temperatures pop up in the Central Valley here. If we pick on the ECMWF forecast specifically, go all the way out toward the end of May, see triple digits return to the Central Valley in a big way, and even looking at, sometimes 80s getting over toward the coast, which is, if you've been over toward the coastal area of California, even in summer, you start to get into the 80s, and they start calling that warm. But certainly the triple digits in the Central Valley, portions of the Southwest, would be worth mentioning here at the end of May. I want to jump over and get an update on the sea surface temperatures. Let's see if this will update as of the 21st, not yet. And I bring this up because we've been watching a few changes here. One, the kind of fading La Nina signature, which is still ever present, but definitely weaker here. But the Northeast Pacific is what we've been keeping an eye on here. This kind of pocket in the Gulf of Alaska, it's called south of Anchorage, west of British Columbia. And it stayed relatively moderate. You see warm temperatures here technically. Don't see a wide cold swath that's developed in here. And we always look at that as a drought risk going into May and June. When this area goes cold and we see more troughs develop here, we tend to get more ridges here. And when the heat and the ridge develops here, we get drought risk that builds in quickly behind it. So while this stays on the warmer side and we have that moisture bank here toward the south, we're almost kind of building a barrier to drought in some ways. Now, I want to caution that over the next 30 days, we could see this change, right? We've seen in those prior problem years that the South has gone dry pretty quickly over the next 30 days. So we'll be watching that closely, right? Seeing the moisture that we're expected to get over the next 10 days, that's good news here. Now, the Northeast Pacific, this changes depending on the weather as well. It's not just this kind of independent thing that's going to change on its own. And if we look at that same AIFS forecast over the next kind of 7 to 10 days, I actually see a low pressure system that kind of continuously spins here south of Anchorage. And I'm plotting the winds here at the surface, and we see a lot of wind kind of helping to mix up the surface of the ocean here over the Northeast Pacific. You can kind of see that even continuing to spin here out into the end of next week and into early June. So that wind over the Northeast Pacific can help upwell some of that cooler water there and can start to inch away at the warmer temperatures that we're seeing even on this sea surface temperature map here, valid as of late May. So I'm going to be watching this closely. We'll be watching how much rainfall we do get across the south. These kind of two areas can help to moderate that drought risk that might build in here over the next 10 days over portions of the upper Midwest, given the lack of rainfall here over the next kind of 7 to 10. We're also seeing the MJO light up a bit. We don't focus quite a bit as much on this in summer because the magnitudes tends to be low. And while we do see kind of this attempt for the MJO to get out into phases 5, 6, and 7, you can see it's not well out here on the phase diagram. It's a weaker signature, but it is there. You can see these kind of spaghetti plots all kind of inching their way across the Pacific here, west to east. We can also see that on this velocity potential diagram. I've been showing these quite a bit this spring, seeing where the convection is over in the Western Pacific. We've seen it kind of locked at times over there toward the maritime continent in Indonesia. We saw this Kelvin wave. We talked about that, how that moved over and helped spur some of the severe weather that we've seen across the country over the last 7 days. But you can see in the forecast, this activity that's kind of been anchored here, really over in the well Western Pacific, is starting to inch out off the maritime continent into the kind of central West Pacific a bit over toward 180. And as it does that, we may see the jet stream start to have some influence from that. And what I mean by that, if we look at this jet stream forecast, I'll try to make this as large as I can from the ECMWF. I'm going to take this forecast quickly because we see some disorganization in the jet stream here as of this morning. On Thursday, we talked about that large ridge over North America and portions of Canada. I can see some of the flow coming south of that. I can see these cutoff lows here for portions of the Central Pacific. But as I take this forecast into next week, this is now Tuesday, notice the pretty quick strengthening of this jet stream all the way across the Pacific. I can kind of draw that jet stream line all the way from Japan north of Hawaii up into British Columbia. So seeing the jet stream strengthen a bit here, we do still see those cutoff lows, not uncommon this time of year as we get toward June. We're seeing that ridge kind of linger here over North America. But the reason I show this is because I take this to June 1st, and whenever we see these kind of transits, where we get some of this convection to move across the Central Pacific, and we see these phases come around from 5, 6, 7 to 8, the jet stream can break down in sometimes a predictable way. And as I take this forecast into early June, you'll notice troughing here across the western U.S., some ridging here across the eastern U.S., and a flow pattern with even a subtropical jets component that would be pretty reliable at returning moisture back to areas like Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, with some potential severe weather to talk about as well. Now, this forecast, we're well out past 10 days at this point, can't put too much validity into it, but at least from the MJO, kind of connecting that to what we're seeing from the jet stream, it is not uncommon for these extensions of the jet stream to break down into a trough across the western U.S., which would be bullish for precipitation across the central part of the country. We'll have to watch at that exactly, see what kind of severe threat develops as a result of that. But even taking that to June 4th or 5th, we still see that troughing across the western U.S. And if you remember from the AFS forecast I showed earlier, see if I can pull that up, when we started to take that further out, we even saw that trough develop across the Pacific Northwest, kind of indicative of better storm chances coming through the middle part of the country. You can see that's trough here. Again, too far out in the forecast to say this is exactly what's going to happen on June 5th, but there is support there looking at the MJO and some of these other signals. I want to look quickly at the Climate Prediction Center as I finish up here. The 6 to 10 day outlook, can see that warmth anchored across the western U.S. with that ridge developing there. This extends well up into Canada. We can't see it because it's off the screen here, but that ridge is so dominant, you can see it almost kind of connected in longitude all the way over toward Maine. That cutoff low kind of beneath that, temperatures below average over much of the central part of the country in the coming days. In fact, I'm going to jump this over quickly because I haven't showed it yet. And we'll jump over and show the minimum temperatures here from the NDFD. You can see those cooler temperatures lingering on Friday across the Midwest. Chilly morning ahead for those of us between the Continental Divide and the Atlantic Ocean, save for parts of Texas. That continues on Saturday and Sunday. On Monday, seeing those cold temperatures even lingering again in this wide area here across the northern half of the country. Tuesday and Wednesday as well. And this configuration like that, that's allowing this cold air to linger in this part of the country. The warmth is west. And I quickly want to show those maximum temperatures here. And the reason I'm doing that is because might as well at this point give us a Memorial Day forecast. And it's not going to be warm for a wide area of the country. If you're west, looking at a warmer Memorial Day, but just about everybody across the eastern part of the country, save for Florida and Texas, getting up into the 90s. looking at 60s, 70s, or low 80s here across the eastern portions of the country. Look at the precipitation map. I mentioned that kind of view, and we can see that really well here from the climate predictions from their 6 to 10 day outlooks, really getting out into the next work week. Drier over the northern tier of the country, and a lot of precipitation chances getting back up into the higher elevations here of New Mexico and the high plains. Anytime you can bring this flow around from the east and get that upslope flow, even in the jet stream, that is a strong signal for high plains and elevation precipitation. We've seen that year in and year out in that area. If we jump over and look at the 8 to 14 day outlook, kind of stretch this forecast into the beginning of June, you can see that heat inching further west. We looked at that forecast on the 31st of triple digits getting over in toward California, and that cold temperature is lingering over the south, but we're finally starting to see some of that ridging getting back over into New England. As this low continues to sit down here, it's going to break down. It's going to weaken with all the storms that we're seeing here. And that's going to hopefully allow some warmth to get back into some areas here over toward Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey. That's been very wet here recently. And we're seeing crop planting progress delayed in some of these areas here. So hoping as we kind of turn the page into June, we get some breaks over toward the mid-Atlantic. We can see that even if we just jump over and look at the ECMWF extended forecast, this updated here recently, and what we're looking at is a rolling 7-day window of precipitation. So I'll take this back valid as of May 30th, and there's that dry signature we talked about across the northern tier of the country, wet over the southern tier. So take this forecast into early June, so June 4th through the 11th, we can see better precipitation chances returning from areas toward Kansas City over toward Wisconsin, Minneapolis, the southeast. Again, we'll have to keep an eye on which of these areas, kind of how this dry line pushes into this area, where the severe storms begin specifically, because that's going to help determine if this precipitation gets back over toward the Central Plains areas like Nebraska and Kansas that we've been keeping an eye on. Temperatures-wise, I'm just going to take this all the way, a 30-day forecast from the beginning of June out through July 1st. And we've been seeing kind of quite a bit of a heat signature here over the Central Plains from the ECMWF weeklies. It's been kind of locked in on that right now. It would not surprise me if we see more warmth move into portions of New England or the northern tier of the country as we go through June specifically. What I'll be watching most closely for in terms of that drought conversation moving forward that we've talked about, the sea surface temperatures in the Northeast Pacific, how much rain we get in the south, right, continuing to build that kind of barrier to our south where we keep that savings bank of green foliage and moisture. But if these soil moisture deficits kind of start to trend up like we're expecting them in this area here over the next 10 days with that lack of rainfall, and then we get into June and we miss out on some of those early June rain chances and we build heat into this area, that's kind of your recipe for a mid to late June ridge over the middle part of the country. And that's where that drought conversation is going to pick up quickly. So that's not the forecast right now specifically. It's simply what I'm going to be watching closely for if that drought risk is going to increase. Cool waters developing quickly in the Northeast Pacific, the south getting a little bit more dry, and then the heat building in here into mid-June. Now the forecast right here from the ECMWF extended forecast doesn't showcase that in any kind of significant signal, but it's also not saying it's going to be cold over northern Illinois and Iowa, so it's something that we'll have to keep an eye on. We look at the precipitation forecast, we can see again through the whole month of June out to July 1st, wetter kind of on the central Mississippi River Valley, kind of really extending up the whole river there and east, drier toward the west. So we're going to have to continue to watch this area here. Do we see the heat kind of anchor here and keep the moisture at bay in this area, or does it move more up here in June and put more of Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin, some areas with the soil moisture deficits and the snowpack deficits on the red alert? So we'll keep an eye on all that going forward. Thanks for listening here this morning, and I'll talk with y'all again next week.